Well, welcome everyone to the Real People, Real Lives, Real Stories podcast. Today, do we have a treat for you? We have someone who was an entrepreneur long before it was even cool to be called an entrepreneur. He started many businesses. He's been a legend in his local community for over 30 years. But there's a bit of a story with this gentleman before he actually got here. Rowan Gregson, thank you very much for joining us today.
G'day, Rob. How you going?
I'm very good, very good. That's a nice picture of your backyard we've got there.
Yeah, it's an accidental picture. It's the one that just popped up when Zoom opened. So there we go. But yeah, it's a lovely backyard, beautiful place to live. I love it.
Mate, awesome. But let's get right into it. You've been in the area on the outskirts of Sydney for our international listeners for over 30 years, but you weren't born here and you didn't start here. Where did you actually start your life and your journeys?
Yeah, a bit of a long story, I guess. I was born in Tasmania, spent the first 10 or 12 years there, and then the family moved to Queensland, and so up there we went and spent a few years there, and then hopped across to WA for a year. So yeah, and then ended up, once I met my lovely wife, back here in Sydney.
So is your wife from Sydney?
Yeah, grew up in Gladesville.
Gladesville. So for people that don't know, Gladesville is just adjacent to the Sydney CBD, about 10 minutes on the outskirts of that. And where you're sitting now is a good hour and 20 minutes out of Sydney. How did you end up in the Camden area?
It's interesting. When I came to Sydney, Pania, my wife, she had a horse, and so we needed some land. And so it wasn't really by design that we ended up out here, but interestingly, her horse was called MacArthur, and that's where we live. Yeah.
Wow. So we're going to get into a little bit about how you managed to build a little business into a business a multinational tried to beat, couldn't, and bought. But before then, what were you doing? Did you just leave school, go to uni? Did you work at a supermarket? Before you started your very successful business, which you're now long sold, what were you doing?
So, well, I guess my first job out of school really was on a farm being a labourer. School didn't suit me. I didn't like it at all. And I ended up in grade 10, then went to a farm as a labourer for a short period of time. And then my father, who owned a pest control company, needed a worker. And so there I was.
And was that in Tasmania?
No, that was in central and far west Queensland. So it was very interesting starting off out in far west Queensland.
So that's fairly dry and humid at the same time, isn't it, out there?
Dry and humid, yes, sure is. It's working up into the Gulf and those sort of areas, really humid, certainly during the rainy season, that sort of thing. So there's lots of bugs around, and so that's where I got my initiation into pest control. Yeah.
So that in those days, I'm sure your dad, like my dad, was an old school business person. What did you learn from him when it came to business, good and bad?
Bad. I'm not sure I could think of it off the top of my head, but
that's good.
Good. It was a great entrepreneur. When the first day that I started with him, we were in a small town called Alpha, and to give some people some context around just where it sat in the world at that time, I had to go and make some phone calls to some customers, and so I picked up a little device and had to say, please speak with Alpha 46. That was the phone number.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of people around today that have never had to use a phone that you can't dial.
Yeah, I know. My first sales job, we had pages. And you rang the office when the pager went off. And they said, can you go and see
You went to a
so-and-so?
phone box, didn't you, Rob? And then
Yeah,
rang
phone
up.
box. And then we started with these phones inside the cars. Still had the pages.
Yeah, no,
So was he a
funny.
hard boss?
He was a hard boss. We used to work 4 weeks on, 3 days off,
Yep.
and that was just full on.
Yep.
He was a good guy. I learned from him, all about how to treat customers well.
Mm.
He was great at customer service. Knew exactly what to do for people, how to keep them happy, and I certainly credit him with just my ingrained ability to look after people.
Yeah. And is that where you met your wife?
No, no, it's a random one. That one when I after yeah, you are a bit random. After being with my father's business for a few years, I decided that I'd had enough of that, and went my own way. Went down to the Sunshine Coast, and I just happened to meet Pania there. So I was working on Sunshine Coast for a little while in a small business there.
Yeah. Doing pest control or doing something else?
Doing pest control.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you do have a good knowledge of insects and a love of them from the sound of it.
Yeah, and from all over the place. So at that stage, I guess I hadn't really got into termites too much, but it's interesting. I met Pania on the Sunshine Coast, but that was after I'd actually been married for a couple of years and split up from my wife, and I fled to the other side of the country. Went to Perth, which I think is a common thing, to run away from your problems.
Yes,
and,
yes.
So I was in Perth for a year or 18 months, and over there I certainly learned a lot about termites and different insects, and given the different climate, different soils, all that sort of thing, how to deal with stuff. And so it was interesting, and it's certainly a different way of life over there, and different qualities that people possess in business. I was there in the bad days of Brian Burke, and the guy that I worked for was actually one of his employees, so I had a bit of inside knowledge. It was just an interesting time in the world. In politics.
So you learnt your trade where a lot of people go to university or go to trade school, and that you learnt your trade the old way.
Yeah, School of Hard Knocks, and I learnt. I probably, for the first few jobs that I'd had, learned a lot of the things not to do, and then I was lucky enough to start rubbing shoulders with people that really knew what they were doing and cared, and were able to point me in the right direction. And since then, I've certainly been very much a learner. And so whether it be about pests or about business or self-development or whatever it might be, I listen to hours and hours, I consume hours of podcasts a week, and an avid reader.
So you'd know the value, or you'd support the old adage that networking can teach you more than just friendship. You can learn a lot from other people.
Yeah, the phrase "your network is your net worth," I think is entirely true.
Yeah. So you're in Western Australia. You've met your current wife. How did you end up an hour and a half out of Sydney at a place called Camden?
We I actually came back through Sydney on a bit of a whim one day, and Punt had actually relocated to here, and I met up with her. One thing led to another, and I decided to come back to Sydney full time with her, and she had a horse, and we needed somewhere to put her. So looked around Sydney, and as far as the outskirts of Sydney goes, you've either got sort of the northwest or the southwest, and the Macarthur area just looked like a nicer place to me. I don't like the rock and granite other side of town. I prefer the rock pastures of Camden.
Fair enough. So you came out here. Did you buy an existing business, or did you start from scratch?
It started from scratch.
And
Yeah.
how hard was that in an area that no one knew you?
To be honest, Rob, I didn't find it difficult. I think it was just at a time when there must have been a gap, because I even did very little marketing, and things took off. And it was really only within probably 18 months to 2 years of being a solo operator that I started to employ a subcontractor, and then Hania came on board, and we decided to really start to grow the business, and we really sort of honed in on what it was that we wanted to do with it.
So for our younger listeners, 30 years ago, how did a business advertise? There was no Facebook, no internet. There was only, I think, 3 TV channels in Sydney, very expensive to advertise on.
Yeah.
How did you advertise, if you had to?
It was mainly a letterbox drops,
It kept you fit.
Was the oh, look, there's a great letterbox drop person just up the road here who used to cover all the areas, and it was a simple fact of print up a couple of thousand brochures and designate an area that you want to work in, and send the people off to deliver it, and it really did work quite well.
So how important back then was word of mouth and doing a quality job?
I'm getting a bit rusty, but I believe that after about 5 years, 63% of our business was repeat or referral business.
Wow. There would be some businesses today that would absolutely die to have that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, when we ended up selling Pestec, we were around the 85% mark.
Wow.
Of repeat and referral business. Yeah. And that was something that we did habitually, and part of our marketing budget was actually put towards repeat and referral business.
So when you look back for those years, I think you started in 1999, was that right?
Yeah, the company was formed in 1999.
Yeah. What do you think your point of difference was? I mean, there was competition out here, but for someone to have such a high retention rate, and we'll get into shortly how you ended up selling to a worldwide conglomerate who tried to beat you and couldn't. You obviously had something very different to everybody else.
Yeah, well, it's hard to put my finger on what we had that was different. I think the fact that we genuinely cared.
Yeah.
We specialised in termite control, and
so a niche is important for someone in business.
Absolutely, I think so.
Yeah.
And I'll talk a little more about that later. But as far as termites go, people get very concerned when you've got a creature that they don't really know what it is. They can barely identify it. They're only 6 or 8, maybe 10 millimetres long, and they're going to silently eat your house from the inside out.
Yeah.
And some people think that they can just spray them with fly spray and they'll go away. It's not going to happen. It's not how they work. And I've known many people that have had to remortgage their house. I've known people who've divorced over the pain and suffering that the financial cost has had. And I guess I have a knack of being able to come into a person's home who's got quite a bit of pain, because often they'll have had a company in, or often a small business, haven't quite known what they're doing with termites. The treatment's failed and they don't know what to do next.
So did the termites pick you, or did you pick them from a love of them?
Good question. I picked them, really. Yeah. I spent several years in playing around with all sorts of pests, and then just decided I really enjoy, it's probably not so much the termites, Rob, but I really enjoy helping people recover from the problem that termites create.
There, I think, is the reason why you ended up being the target of another company.
Yeah, quite possibly. And the technicians that we employed were all high quality people that we chose for their personal attributes of being able to look after the people, for their customer service qualities. And, because you can teach anyone to kill bugs. It's not that hard, but you've got to apply yourself. But looking after the customers, so that's a different story.
Yeah. So I'm sure people are sitting there going, yeah, termites. And as you said before, a lot of people don't know much about them.
No.
If someone came up to you and, you're sitting there in their kitchen and they've obviously got a termite problem and they said to you, what is it about a termite? What is something that, they don't know anything about? What would you tell someone? How would you describe these small little insects that can actually ruin someone's life, really?
Yeah, well, they are an insidious creature because they're subterranean in nature. That means they nest underground, they travel underground, and so they'll get to your house without any visible signs above ground, and then they'll work their way in through a crack or crevice and eat it out. So, what do I tell people about it? Well, the main thing that I tell people is, yeah, they're a big problem, but I can fix them. Don't worry about it. It's my problem now.
So you put them at
Once
ease.
they pay the bill, it's my problem.
So you put them at ease.
Yes, absolutely. No, I work really hard at making sure to put them at ease. And, it's often a long conversation at the kitchen table, often a couple of hours, because it's not an inexpensive exercise to do. And, it might cost them $4,000 or $5,000 to treat their house, and then they've still got to fix the damage. So, it's quite a hit when people aren't expecting, no one budgets for termites getting in the house.
No, well, I suppose it's something that's not going to be cured with $150 spray and go, is it?
No, but a lot of people think it will.
Is it something that can be cured in a house?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, we can get termites out of the house and keep them out.
And before we move on to when you sold the business and what you're doing these days, how can people, I know, because people will be going, oh, Shavers, how do I know if I've got termites in my house or how do I stop them coming? Because I don't know anything about them.
Yeah, sure. No, well, you need to have a termite inspection done every 12 months, and you just got to be able to find an appropriate person to do that for you. It's a little hard to choose, but you just need to be able to do a bit of research on whatever company that you're using. You don't want to be someone green. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine that these days a pest controller can go and do the training that is needed to get a license in 5 days. They really don't need very much experience after that. They can essentially set up their own company and off they go. And a 5-day course that doesn't even teach them how to use pesticides. It teaches them the legislation of things.
So you got a reputation as being probably one of the best in Sydney. I did a bit of research on you. And back then, when you still owned the company, you were known as the termite company to go to. Like, there was a lot of companies doing it. But this small little company on the outside of Sydney was battling and winning against major companies from America and Europe. They were cheaper than you, and you were still winning business.
Yeah, that's right.
What happened when someone knocked on the door and said, would you like to sell? And who they were from, and you've gone, wow, well, what's going on here?
Well, it didn't quite happen that way. We planned for probably 2 years to exit the business, and so just put everything in order, and then we headed off to America and talked to the biggest company in the US, and about the fact that we knew that they were coming into Australia. Then we came back home and spoke with the largest couple of companies here, and sort of let it sit for a while. All of them had expressed an interest.
Of course they did.
And it's an interesting industry. Generally, every 6 to 7 years, there's a bit of flurry from the multinationals buying up smaller companies. And I think we hit it around about the right time, and it was nice, but it wasn't something we certainly didn't want to leave our employees who loved high and dry. So we didn't just want to jump our customers either. Because we'd had long relationships with people that we'd been looking after their houses, and so we really needed to choose pretty carefully who we sold to and how we did it.
So it really wasn't just about the money. It was all about really just looking after the people you work for. You cared about your customers, and that was probably part of your success.
Yes, I think it was, and a lot of the success is that Pania has that same innate want to keep or to make people happy, and as I do, and so we just work fantastically well together with that, and that's really been a big part of it.
So knowing after reading about you that most people would think, okay, big multinational comes in, buys the company, probably keeps you on for a little while as a consultant to keep the place going. Did you put your feet up and sail around the Caribbean, or what was your next challenge? Because you don't look like someone who was going to sit there and do nothing, to be honest.
No.
What's your passion since?
We haven't put our feet up at all. And yes, I did do some work for them after we'd sold. For a little while. It was an interesting experience. I learned a whole lot of stuff there. But Pania and I have always had a bit of a passion here at home, building gardens. We've always loved gardens, and so Pania loves them. I build them.
Sounds pretty normal for a household.
That's how it works. So what we wanted to do was build some gardens, and as time went on, we worked out that we had just have a fantastic, beautiful spot, and wanted to start allowing the people that were asking us to have weddings and different functions and things here. And so once people were starting to ask us, we thought, well, we better have a look at this seriously, and so we got gardens designed by a garden designer and just started developing the gardens. And so now we're approved by council as a function centre just before COVID hit. So as time goes on, we'll be starting to market ourselves, not particularly as a function centre. That was the only thing we could get through as under their rules, but as a venue for people to have wedding ceremonies and functions and that sort of thing, because they're beautiful gardens, a beautiful setting. Our property is a 120-year-old dairy property, and there's some historic buildings. The house is beautiful as well.
So you survived the 2-year drought that Sydney was in?
That drought was really tough. We went to the expense of putting a bore in. We thought, well, because we normally watered from the creek, and the creek dried up for the first time in living memory of people around here. And so we went to the expense of putting in a bore, and then found that the iron levels of the water in the bore was so high that it blocked up all of the irrigation that we'd paid to put in. And
so it wasn't salt; it was iron.
Iron, yeah.
Wow.
So it was quite a nightmare. And at one point they were trucking in a couple of loads of water a week to keep the plants alive. Which I'm glad we did now, because there was a big investment, and things are looking glorious now.
If you've had a magnificent journey. I mean, anyone who can start a business from scratch, sell it to a multinational, be as successful as you are, and be very well respected within your the pest community. I mean, it is it's not an easy job. If you're looking at someone who was looking to go into, say, pest control, or even any type of small business, looking back at your journey of all the good, the bad, the mistakes, the successes you had, what would you tell them? Would you tell them to run and go and get a 9-to-5 and don't bother, or would you say jump in completely?
Well, as you would well know, Rob, whether you are working for a boss, it's hard, or you've got your own business, it's hard. It's just about choosing your hard. And so, it's the same 24 hours in every day, whether you're working for a boss or working for yourself. So I'd say go for it. And I always think focus, follow one course until successful.
Excellent. So what about Rowan now, if he puts his rear vision goggles on and he's standing there looking at a 20-year-old Rowan, finished school, working for the old man, what would you tell yourself?
I think I would tell myself to think bigger.
Really?
Yes. I think if I had in the early days thought bigger, then I could have done a few more things that I wanted to do earlier.
Yeah. Have you got what's next on the chapter for Rowan and Pania? Is it going to be happy just being the number one outdoor wedding venue in Sydney that I'm sure you're aiming for, or?
I think we could end up killing bugs again.
Yeah, because it's your passion, isn't it? You love helping people out.
Yes, that's right. So no, I think we'll end up back there, and we'll see what happens. We might just meet some multinationals again one day.
You never know.
You never know.
You never know. So if you're sitting there at the table and you've got a lovely table with you and Pania, and there's 4 seats at your table, and you can invite anybody, dead or alive, to sit at the table and have a chat with, who would you invite and why?
I'd certainly put John Howard on the list.
The former Prime Minister of Australia, yes.
Prime Minister, yes. I very much respect what he did for our country, and I certainly think his whole way that he reacted to Port Arthur with the gun buyback scheme and that sort of thing, that's put our country in very good stead as far as that sort of thing goes. I'd love to sit down with my grandfather at the dinner table.
I'd have to agree with you on that one.
Yeah. Pania's father I never got to meet.
Okay.
And so I'd love to be able to sit down and have a chat with him. And, it's interesting, we've ended up on a dairy farm here, and dairy played a big part in my history. My grandfather was a dairy farmer. My father had milk tankers picking up milk from dairy farms in his early life. And Pania's father was a dairy farmer. Okay. And, it's, there'd be a whole heck of a lot to talk about there. The other random person, that I'd like to sit down and have dinner with is Einstein. I'd just love to be able to pick the brains of someone that can think so big. I'd love to know how that's done.
He'd probably ask you more questions than you would get of him.
Well...
Those guys seem to be able to really be, they love to listen to what everyone else seems to say.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, really smart guys do. But, he'd be an interesting one for sure.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to your story today. I think anyone going into business, or is even in business, they hear your story, they're going to say, well, you know what? Rowan did it. We can certainly do it. I think it's a big feather in your cap that you didn't sell yourself out. You stayed true to who you were the whole way through. Your customers rewarded you for it. Business saw what you did. You had a passion for what you do. And I think it's been absolutely amazing listening to how you did it and the rewards you're now getting from it.
Thanks, Rob. It's been really good. It's been a great journey for sure. And, there's ups and downs along the way, but it's just, it's fantastic. And love to chat with anyone who wants to have a talk about it.
No worries at all, mate. Well, I'm sure your journey's not over yet. I think we'll probably have a chat in about 12 months and you'll have some other big adventure that you're on, and you made a massive success, because you do have certainly a lot of drive. It's been fantastic listening to you today. Thanks, everyone. As we say, have a groovy day, and we'll catch you in a week's time.